The supply tag was still warm when Trade Auditor Veshk found it. That was the first thing wrong, and she did not yet understand why it disturbed her so much. A polymer identification tag, no larger than her smallest claw, recovered from the wreckage of the freighter Meridian hauling 7. It had been logged, scanned, cataloged, and filed under human personal effects, non-military. Standard procedure. The Concord did this with every salvaged vessel. The dead were not interesting, only their cargo manifests were, but the tag was warm and the freighter had been adrift for 9 days. Veshk turned it over in her manipulators. On one side, a serial code. On the other, scratched by hand into the polymer with something sharp, were 4 words in the human trade script. We counted them too. She did not know what it meant. She filed it anyway because that was her function, and because the alternative, admitting she did not understand something a human had done, was not a thing an auditor of the Concord permitted herself. The humans were a frontier species, barely 14 cycles into recognized contact. They flew patchwork ships welded from 3 generations of borrowed technology. They were slow, soft, and short-lived. They were, by every metric the Concord measured, beneath concern. So Veshk filed the tag and told herself the warmth was a sensor error. It was not a sensor error, but it would be 11 days before anyone in the Concord understood that, and by then it would already be far, far too late to matter. The thing you have to understand about the Veshk Concord, and the humans understood it long before the Concord understood the humans, is that it was not an empire of cruelty. It was an empire of accounting. 41 species, bound across 900 years of treaties, all of whom had learned the same fundamental lesson at the same fundamental cost, that the galaxy is a place of finite resources and infinite appetite, and that the only stable civilization is one that knows, precisely, what everything is worth. The Concord did not hate the species it absorbed. It simply priced them. A world's mineral yield, a population's labor output, a fleet's projected combat value against projected losses, every variable reduced to a number, and the numbers told you what was permissible. War was permissible when the projected gain exceeded the projected cost. Mercy was permissible when it was cheaper than cruelty. The Concord had not lost a strategic calculation in 200 years, and this was not arrogance. It was simply true. So when the convoy raids began in the Cephaline Drift, the thin belt of contested space where human freighter lanes brushed against Concord patrol routes, the Concord priced the situation and found it trivial. Tactical Overseer Kren was given the file. He read it in less time than it takes to describe. Human freighters, lightly defended, carrying ore and grain and machine parts between their scattered colonies. Conquered raider squadrons, faster and better armed, taking what they wanted. It was not even policy. It was opportunism, a few raider captains operating in the gray space the treaties did not quite cover, and the Conquered had no incentive to stop them because the math was clean. The humans lost cargo. The raiders gained cargo. The humans were too weak to retaliate and too poor to matter. Kren approved the continued operations with a single notation: negligible risk. Recommend escalation if yield improves. He would much later request that this notation be struck from the record. The request would be denied. The Conquered kept everything. That was the whole point of the Conquered. The raids escalated, of course they did. When something is free, you take more of it. 6 convoys in the first month, 11 in the second. The raider captains grew bold, grew organized, began coordinating their strikes, and the humans, this was the part everyone noticed, the part that was logged and dismissed. The humans did nothing. They did not send warships. They had barely any warships to send. They did not file grievances with the Conquered arbitration councils, which would have been the logical move for a weak species seeking protection. They did not even reroute their shipping lanes, which the Conquered analysts found genuinely strange, because rerouting was cheap and obvious, and any rational species would have done it immediately to cut their losses. Instead, the humans kept sending convoys down the same lanes. Again and again into the same killing ground, as though they had not learned the lesson the universe was teaching them. The Conquered analysts had a word for this. They called it prey blindness, the failure of a primitive species to recognize a predator pattern. It was common in newly contacted civilizations. It was, frankly, a little sad. Kren's office issued an internal assessment. The humans were not strategically sophisticated enough to respond. They would continue absorbing losses until their economy collapsed or they retreated from the drift entirely. Estimated timeline, 8 to 14 months. Recommended conquered action, none. Let the situation resolve itself. This assessment was wrong in every particular, but it was wrong in a way that took months to become visible, and the most important thing, the thing that should have made Kren's blood run cold if he had been capable of seeing it, was the consistency of the human convoys. They kept the same schedule, the same routes, the same cargo profiles. A weak species panics, and panic is erratic. A weak species varies its behavior desperately, trying everything, finding nothing. The humans varied nothing. They were patient and they were precise, and they were, in their refusal to adapt, behaving exactly like something that did not need to adapt. Veshk noticed this before Kren did. She was only an auditor far below his station, but auditing is the discipline of noticing what doesn't reconcile, and the human convoys did not reconcile. She ran the cargo manifests against the actual salvage recovered from destroyed freighters and found a discrepancy of 4%. Small, within tolerance. The kind of thing that could be loss in transit, sensor error, rounding. Except it was the same 4%. Every convoy, every freighter. 4% of declared cargo, consistently, was never recovered from the wreckage. She told herself it was a logging error and she was lying to herself, and somewhere underneath her composure she knew it. What was in the missing 4%? Where did it go if the freighters were destroyed before they could jettison anything? And why? This was the question that kept surfacing no matter how many times she pushed it down. Why would the humans declare cargo they knew would be stolen, on routes they knew were ambushed, in ships they knew would die? She submitted a query up the chain. It was marked low priority. It would sit in a processing queue for 6 days, and in those 6 days the cephaline drift would change forever. The protagonist of this story is not Veshk, though she will matter more than she yet knows. The protagonist is a human woman named Idi Renat, and the first time the Conquered noticed her, she was already dead. Or so they believed. Idi Renat was a convoy logistics coordinator, not a soldier, not a pilot. A woman who organized cargo and signed manifests and rode the freighters to verify the accounting, because the human colonies were poor and could not afford to lose a single container to fraud or error. She was 41 years old. She had a daughter on the colony world of Tasker's Reach, a girl of 9 named Sepha who had been named, and the Conquered would not understand this for a very long time after the drift itself, after the place her mother worked, after the lanes that fed their world. The Conquered recovered Idi Renat's identification tag from the freighter Meridian hauling 7, logged her as deceased, and moved on. She was not on the freighter when it died. She had not been on a freighter in 4 months. The tag was a plant, one of 40,000, and the message scratched into it, "We counted them too," was the first piece of a sentence the Conquered would spend the rest of the war trying to finish. Here is what the Conquered did not know, and what it would learn in the worst possible sequence. The humans had not been failing to respond to the raids. They had been measuring them. Every convoy that went into the drift and died was a sensor. The cargo profiles were calibration tools. Declare a known mass, lose a known mass, and the difference tells you the capabilities of what's taking it. The consistent routes were not prey blindness. They were a controlled experiment run 41 times across 8 months, each freighter feeding data back through encrypted bursts in the instant before destruction, building a map, raider response times, engagement ranges, squadron compositions, jump signatures, communication delays. The fingerprint of every raider captain operating in the drift, assembled from the deaths of ships that the humans had deliberately, calculatedly, sent to be destroyed. The 4% that never appeared in the salvage was the part the humans took back. Not cargo. Data drives, ejected on tight burn trajectories into the dark, retrieved later by craft the Conquered never detected because the Conquered was not looking for anything as cheap and slow as a drifting capsule the size of a fist. Idi Renat had designed the manifest system. the accounting that turned each dead freighter into a single clean line of intelligence. She had spent 8 months signing the death warrants of ships and the crews who volunteered to fly them, and every crew had volunteered, and this is the part that the conquered would understand last and least. They had known. The crews had known the freighters were bait. They had flown anyway because each death sharpened the map, and the map was the only weapon a poor species had against an empire that could outbuild them 1,000 to 1. They counted them too. The raiders had been counting human losses. The humans had been counting the raiders. But none of this is what broke the conquered's understanding. The intelligence was only the beginning, and the beginning was the gentlest part. The retaliation, when it came, did not look like retaliation. That was the first misinterpretation, and it was a beautiful and terrible mistake. On a day the conquered later marked as the start of the war, though the humans would say the war had been running for 8 months already, a raider squadron under Captain Voraltesh, the most successful of the drift raiders, ambushed a human convoy in the Crescent Narrows. 6 freighters, lightly escorted, exactly the kind of soft target Tesh had grown fat on. He had run this exact engagement profile 30 times. He knew how it went. It did not go how it went. The freighters did not flee. They did not even try to evade. They turned toward the raiders, all 6 accelerating, and Tesh's first thought logged in his combat record, which the humans would later recover and broadcast across the entire conquered, an act of psychological warfare so precise it would be studied for generations. Tesh's first thought was that the human pilots had panicked and lost control. Prey blindness. Even now. Even charging straight at him, the humans were being dismissed as stupid. Then the freighters opened up, and they were not freighters. They were the same hulls. The same slow, patchwork, pathetic hulls the conquered had been destroying for months. But the humans had spent 8 months learning exactly how the raiders fought, exactly where they positioned, exactly how they closed, exactly the range at which they committed to a kill. And they had built their ambush not out of better weapons but out of better knowledge. The freighters were packed with mass drivers salvaged from defensive platforms, weapons too slow and short-range to matter in open battle, useless against a maneuverable enemy. Useless, unless you knew precisely where your enemy would be, because you had taught him, over 30 engagements, to go there. Tesh lost 4 of 6 ships in the first 11 seconds. He survived because he broke and ran, and breaking and running was the only thing the humans had not predicted, because in 8 months of study no raider captain had ever needed to. He made it back to a conquered station with his hull cracked and his crew screaming, and a single coherent report. They knew where we would be. They knew before we knew. The conquered priced this. A raider squadron lost. Regrettable, but the raiders were not regular forces, and their losses did not appear on the conquered strategic ledger. Kren read the report and found it irritating rather than alarming. A primitive species had set a clever trap. Clever traps could be countered with overwhelming force. He authorized a regular patrol squadron, real conquered warships, not raider opportunists, to enter the drift and demonstrate the difference between predators and scavengers. This was the second misinterpretation, and it was the one that began to frighten people. The conquered patrol squadron entered the drift expecting to find humans flush with a single victory, overconfident, exploitable. They expected the humans to repeat the trick that had worked, because that is what an unsophisticated enemy does. It finds the thing that works and clings to it. The humans never repeated anything. The freighter ambush was used exactly once. By the time the conquered squadron arrived, the humans had moved to something else entirely. Minefields seeded along the gravitational eddies that conquered navigation systems treated as safe, because the eddies were too weak to matter to a sophisticated drive, and the humans had learned that conquered pilots, trusting their sophistication, never checked them. The conquered lost 2 cruisers to mines in water they had been trained their entire lives to consider empty. And here is where the alien perspective begins to curdle, because it was a conquered navigator named Celes, a junior officer aboard the surviving cruiser, who said the thing out loud that no one wanted to say. "They're not fighting us," Celes said, staring at the wreckage of the cruiser that had died beside her. "They're teaching us. Every time we lose, we learn something. and every time we learn it, they've already moved past it. Her commander told her to be silent. But Celes was right, and the wrongness she had identified was deeper than she knew, because it implied something the Conquered's entire civilization was structurally incapable of accepting, that the humans were not trying to win engagements. They were trying to make the Conquered expensive to itself. Every counter the Conquered developed, the humans abandoned the instant it became countered, forcing the Conquered to keep developing counters to threats that no longer existed, spending real resources to defend against ghosts. The Conquered ran on accounting. The humans had found a way to make the Conquered's own arithmetic bleed it. But why? This was the question that surfaced in every analysis cell, every command staff, every late cycle session of officers who could not sleep. The humans could not win. The Conquered outnumbered them, outbuilt them, out-everything-ed them by margins that made victory mathematically certain. The humans had to know this. They were clearly intelligent, terrifyingly, patiently intelligent. So why were they fighting a war they could not win, in a way designed not to win it but only to make it cost more? Veshk found a piece of the answer, and she wished she hadn't. Her low-priority query about the 4% had finally surfaced, and in chasing it she had pulled the full salvage records for every human freighter destroyed in the drift over 8 months. She was looking for the missing cargo. She found something worse. She found the crew records, 41 freighters, 308 human crew, and not one of them, not a single one, had been conscripted, drafted, or assigned. Every name in the records was flagged with the same notation in the human files the Conquered had captured. Volunteer. 308 people had volunteered to fly slow ships into ambushes they knew they would not survive, so that their deaths could be measured. Veshk sat with this for a long time. In the Conquered, a soldier fought because the math required it, because the projected cost of refusal exceeded the projected cost of fighting. That was how every species in the Conquered understood courage, as a calculation in which fighting was, on balance, the better deal. It was rational. It was priceable. There was no price that made flying to a certain death a better deal than living. The human math did not balance. And if the human math did not balance, then the humans were operating on some variable the Conquered could not see, could not measure, and therefore could not defeat, because you cannot outbid an enemy in a currency you do not possess. She wrote this in her report. She wrote, "The humans are not maximizing survival. We do not know what they are maximizing. Until we know, every strategic projection we make against them is invalid." Her report was read by Kren. And Kren, to his credit and his doom, understood that she was right and escalated. And the escalation is where the story stops being about strategy and starts being about Idi Renat. Because the Conquered, faced with an enemy whose motivations it could not price, did the thing the Conquered always did when its arithmetic failed. It changed the variables until the arithmetic worked again. If the humans could not be deterred by losses to their fleet, then the Conquered would threaten something the humans valued more. It would threaten their worlds. Tasker's Reach was not a military target. It had no shipyards, no defense grid worth the name, no strategic value at all except the one value that mattered. It was where the convoy crews came from. It was where the volunteers' families lived. The Conquered identified it through the captured personnel records, the same records Veshk had read, and Kren authorized a demonstration, not a conquest. The Conquered did not need to conquer Tasker's Reach. It needed only to prove that it could, so that the humans would understand the new price of continued resistance, and the arithmetic would, at last, balance. A single Conquered battle cruiser was dispatched to hold position above Tasker's Reach and transmit a simple message to the human leadership: "Stop, or we begin." This was the third misinterpretation, and it was the one that ended the Conquered's innocence forever. Kren believed he had found the human variable. He believed the thing the humans were maximizing was the survival of their families, that the convoy crews flew to their deaths for their children, and that by threatening the children he had found the lever that would finally move them. It was a sound deduction. It was even partly true, and it was catastrophically, fatally incomplete. Itty Renat was on Tasker's reach when the cruiser arrived. She had come home, finally, after 8 months of signing death warrants, to spend what she believed might be her last weeks with Cepha. She was standing in the doorway of a prefab habitat watching her daughter chase something small and quick across the red dust when the sky filled with the shadow of a conquered warship, and the broadcast came down in 40 languages, and the meaning settled over the colony like a held breath. And the people of Tasker's Reach did not panic. This is the moment. If you remember nothing else, remember this, because the conquered remembered nothing else for the rest of its existence. The cruiser's sensors watched the colony, expecting terror, expecting the humans to flee to their ships, to scatter, to send up the desperate pleading transmissions of a population that has just understood it as hostage. The conquered commander, a careful officer named Doral, watched and waited for the fear that would prove Kren right, the fear that would balance the arithmetic. Instead, the colony went quiet, and then it began to organize. Doral's sensors showed it without understanding it. The civilian population of Tasker's Reach moving with purpose, not panic. Children gathered into the deepest structures. Adults dispersing to positions that meant nothing to conquered analysts until it was too late, because Tasker's Reach, the undefended colony with no military value, had spent 8 months becoming something the conquered had no category for. Every habitat was a hardpoint. Every mining charge was a weapon. Every member of the population, down to the elderly and the half-grown, had a position and a task in a defensive plan that had been rehearsed so many times it required no orders. The humans had known the conquered would come for their families. They had known it from the beginning. The entire Convoy campaign, the measured deaths, the bleeding of the conquered's arithmetic, had been designed to draw exactly this response, to make the conquered do the only thing that could turn a poor frontier colony into a thing the conquered could not afford to attack. Because here is the variable Kren never saw, the thing the humans were maximizing, the answer to the question the entire conquered had been unable to price. The humans were not trying to save their families by surrendering. They had decided, every one of them collectively 8 months ago, that they would rather die together than be priced separately. The convoy crews had not flown to their deaths despite their families. They had flown so that the conquered would learn, slowly and at great cost, that there was no lever, that the thing the humans valued could not be held hostage, because it was not survival. It was each other, and you cannot threaten a people into surrender by threatening the only thing they have already agreed to die for. Itty Renat did not run to a shelter. She walked calmly to a comm station that had been waiting 8 months for her, and she opened a channel to the conquered cruiser, and she spoke to Commander Doral directly because the humans had wanted a conquered officer to hear this from a human mouth. "You think you found our weakness," she said. "The conquered recorded it. The conquered would replay it 10 million times. You think you found the thing we love, and you think love makes us soft. Let me tell you what we learned about you in 8 months of dying. You have never once in 900 years met a species that would choose to lose. You priced everything because everything could be priced. And then you met us, and we have spent 8 months teaching you with our own dead, the one number your accounting cannot hold." "What number?" Doral asked, and his voice on the recording is the voice of a man who already knows he should not have asked. "The number of us you would have to kill," Itty Renat said, "before we stop, and the answer is all of us. There is no convoy you can take, no colony you can threaten, no price you can name that we will pay because we decided all of us, everyone, that we would rather end together than continue apart. You cannot deter a people who have already accepted death. You can only finish them. And every time you try, you teach the next world to choose the same thing before you arrive." She paused. On the recording you can hear faintly a child's voice somewhere behind her, Cepha asking a question. Itty Renat does not answer her daughter, she answers Doral. "You came here to make us afraid, but we have already buried 308 of our own to bring you to this exact moment so that you would understand finally what we are. We are not the strongest thing you have ever met. We know that. We have always known that. We are the thing that does not stop. And now you have to decide whether you can afford to find out how true that is." And then she closed the channel, and Commander Doral was left holding a battle cruiser over a colony of farmers, with orders to make them afraid, and the dawning comprehension that he was facing a population that had already, calmly, finished being afraid 8 months ago, and had spent every day since preparing to make their deaths cost the conquered more than the conquered could bear. He did not fire. This was, in the cold arithmetic of the conquered, the correct decision. Firing would have killed a colony of no strategic value while teaching 40 more human worlds to fortify exactly as Tasker's Reach had fortified. The math did not support it. Doral pulled back to assess, requested new orders, and waited. And in that pause, that single moment of conquered hesitation, the humans did the thing that ended the war, and it was not an attack. It was a broadcast. Everything. The entire 8 months of it. The intelligence operation, the measured deaths, the volunteer records, Idi Renat's transmission, and most devastating of all, the conquered's own internal documents, Kren's negligible risk notation, the prey blindness assessments, the order to threaten Tasker's Reach, the captured combat records of Captain Tesh's panic. The humans had gathered it all, and they released it to every species in the conquered simultaneously, in every language, with a single human message appended. This is how they decided you were worth. Numbers. We are the ones who showed them a number they could not pay. Now you know it can be done. The conquered was 41 species bound by the belief that everything could be priced. The humans had just proven with documentation that this belief had a flaw, and that the flaw could be exploited not by the strong but by the willing. Across 41 species, populations who had spent 900 years believing the conquered's arithmetic was a law of nature suddenly held in their hands the proof that it was only a strategy, and that a poor, soft, short-lived frontier species had broken it with nothing but the refusal to be afraid. The conquered did not fall in fire. It fell in arithmetic. Within a cycle, 3 member species were renegotiating their treaties. Within 10, the raider captains had been disowned and tried, not out of justice, but because their losses now appeared for the first time on a ledger that mattered. The conquered did not lose a war. It lost the only thing that had ever held it together, the certainty that its numbers were true. But this is an HFY story, and HFY stories are about humanity. And so we have to come back to Idi Renat, because the cost has not yet been paid, and the ending is not clean, because the humans of this story knew that endings are never clean and built their entire strategy on the willingness to pay anyway. Tasker's Reach was not attacked. Doral pulled back. But 3 other colonies were, because the conquered was 41 species, and not all of them accepted the humans' lesson with grace. Some of them, the ones who had risen highest under the old arithmetic, who had the most to lose from a galaxy that could no longer be priced, chose to prove the humans wrong. They chose to demonstrate that humanity could be finished, that the number was payable after all, that you simply had to be willing to kill all of them. And they began with the colonies that had no Idi Renat to speak for them, no 8 months of preparation, no warning. She had known this might happen. That was the part of the plan she had never told anyone, not the crews who volunteered, not the colonies that fortified, not her own daughter. The broadcast that broke the conquered would also enrage the part of it that could not survive being broken. She had calculated the logistics coordinator, the woman who priced cargo, had done the one piece of accounting the conquered could not, that the lesson would cost lives. That to prove humanity could not be deterred, some humans would have to be killed demonstrating it. 308 volunteers had bought the first lesson. The second lesson was bought by colonies that never volunteered at all, and Idi Renat carried that, and she had chosen it, because the alternative was a galaxy that priced her daughter and found her wanting, and she would rather a hard galaxy that feared humanity than a tidy one that owned it. The war's true end did not come at Tasker's Reach. It came 8 months later at a colony called Hennet's Drop, where one of the conquered's proudest species made its demonstration, sent a fleet to finish a human world entirely, to prove the number was payable, and learned, the way Captain Tesh had learned, the way Doral had learned, that the humans had been counting them too. That Hennet's Drop had been waiting. That 8 months of human preparation had turned another undefended colony into a wound that swallowed a fleet. It cost Hennitz drop everything. The colony did not survive, but neither did the fleet, and the species that sent it never recovered, and across the rest of the Concord, the final piece of the lesson landed with the weight of a closing door. Not only could humans not be deterred, they could not be finished without a cost that finished you first. The number was real, the number was payable, and the price of paying it was yourself. That was when the Concord stopped, not out of mercy. Out of arithmetic at last corrected. The humans had finally taught the empire of accounting the one true number, and the number was this. A species that will not stop is not a species you defeat. It is a species you survive if you are lucky, and only by leaving it alone. Veshk lived to see it. The auditor who found the warm tag, who first noticed that the human convoys did not reconcile. She rose in the years after to a position where she could read the full record, and she read all of it, and she kept on her desk, against regulation, a single recovered polymer identification tag with 4 words scratched into it. We counted them too. She understood it now. She understood that the humans had been counting from the very first raid, counting the raiders, counting their own dead, counting the exact cost they would have to pay, and pay willingly, to teach the galaxy a number it did not want to learn. She understood that the warmth she had dismissed as a sensor error 11 days too late had been real, because the tag had been carried in a living human hand and placed deliberately in the wreckage as a message. And the message had been there from the beginning, waiting the way the humans waited, the way the humans always waited, patient as a held breath, certain as arithmetic, for the moment the galaxy was finally ready to understand. She never met Idi Renat. Few did. The woman who broke the Concord did not become a leader or a legend in any way the Concord could have priced. She went home to Tasker's Reach, to the colony that survived because she had made it impossible to attack, and she raised her daughter in the red dust. And when Sepha was old enough to ask what her mother had done in the war, Idi Renat is reported, by the one human source the Concord ever managed to record, to have said only this: "I taught them how to count." And the galaxy, 41 species who had believed for 900 years that everything had a price and every price could be paid, learned to fall quiet whenever the humans grew patient. Learned to fear, most of all, the human capacity for stillness, the long, measured, unblinking calm of a people doing arithmetic, because they had seen what the humans did with their numbers, and they understood at last that the most dangerous sound in the galaxy was not a human battle cry. It was a human, somewhere in the dark, counting their dead, counting their enemies, counting the exact cost of the thing they had already calmly together decided they were willing to pay, and waiting with all the time in the world for the rest of the galaxy to learn the number 2.